I'm ready when you are, whatever. I think we got a couple more. I think we're good. I think everybody's okay. Let's see if the mic pick up all right. You got a sound check? You get it? Okay. All right, we'll get started. The next talk, I entitled it "The Core of Cybersecurity is Risk Management." I like to poke fun at Bill too and use the word cyber whenever I can. Of course, he's not in the room right now, but that's okay.
My mic's working fine. The mic might be off. Go ahead and just go.
All right, we're going to keep going. Is it test? Any better? There it is. I think that's picking up now. Okay, so we'll go into this. So first off, we're just going to explain who I am. My name is Josh Spence. I work for the state as the Chief Information Security Officer in the Office of Technology. I started my InfoSec career in the Air Force, and of course all of the opinions here are of my own and nobody else's. So the first question is, what is risk management and why are we talking about it? Well, we can talk about what it is not. It's not as cool as being on the red team, which is supposed to be the coolest thing, but I was never really a red team person. It's also not as cool as being on the blue team. Blue team rocks. And it's not as cool as lock picking. So, and of course, when I go into Lockpick Village and I try to pick locks, this is the look I think I get from Adrian, typically. But that's okay. I'm learning. But it's a necessary evil that we have to deal with in InfoSec, and I think sometimes we lose sight of how important the risk management piece is because we all have limited resources. And so it acts as a bridge, and it's an important bridge because we're going to take the technical information that the executives don't understand, and we're going to bridge it with the business process information that they do to find the answer on where we're going to spend the limited resources that we have. If you don't do this, then you find yourself banging your head against the wall. Because it's not so much of being able to say you have X number of CVE vulnerabilities on a server, but how does that translate in cost? How does that translate into risk for the agency, the organization, the company? So it's important to understand how you can calculate this information and make sure you add it in. And we have to recognize that security is a balanced game. As you incorporate security, you reduce functionality. And this is just the way it is, unfortunately. So we have to find that equal balance. We can't make everything lockdown secure because we may not have the functionality it needs to actually perform the purpose in which it's intended. So we have to make sure we balance it. And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's look, why can't everything just be secure from the start? Well, unfortunately, security is hard. We all know why. One, the user's focus is on does it work. They don't really care about a backup until the data's gone, and they want restoration. They don't care about the uninterrupted power supply connected to it until the power goes off. They don't care about the data being stolen by a nation-state actor or just some script kiddie until it's gone. And that's the problem. Their focus is totally on the operation of the device itself. Does it do what it's intended? Not so much does it do what it's intended securely. And that's where we have to change the mindset, and it's through risk management that you can do that. IT also changes rapidly, so it puts us behind the 8 ball because you have to move quickly with the changes. And then, of course, we're also fixing the last 30-plus years of where technology was just meant to work, to connect, to communicate, to operate, and security was an afterthought. It was bolted on, not baked in, and we have to change the way things are created now, but we have to go back and fix what's already in existence. So there's 2 parts of it, and it's going to take some time. But again, I think you have to start with the risk management piece. So how do you make security easier? And we'll do a little art of war here, but you need to know yourself, which is typically your vulnerabilities. You have to know the enemy, which can be translated into your threats. And then you use that to educate by calculating the risk. So how are we going to do that? And this can help from being the issue of being overwhelmed with where do you start. You come into an organization and maybe they have all their systems, and your first look is that there's just so many things wrong with it. Why are they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And you get overwhelmed. It's like, where do I even tackle this? And and you get frustrated if you just go after it without a plan of action. And so I think you start with your risk management plan so that you can ensure that you're spending your effort on the risk that matters most. So let's look at how we do risk management. So let's talk about the first one, which is vulnerabilities. So basically, vulnerability is a weakness. And obviously, you don't have to know about it. It can exist and you not know about it because maybe you didn't know about that device. So you're not scanning that device. Or maybe it exists and it's a 0-day. And so you don't know about it because nobody knows about it. You have to take those into account. I wouldn't worry too much about the 0-day stuff because there's only so much you can do. Let's focus on all the numerous known vulnerabilities that are still out there, the numerous number of XP boxes and 2003 boxes that are still sitting out there for operational environments processing critical data. So focus on what you do know about and find the vulnerabilities, your weaknesses. It's important to understand the threat. Now, the threat is any actor or event that poses a danger. There's different levels of threat based on their likelihood, but they can be human, they can be natural, like a natural disaster, or they can be environmental. The one thing about threat right now that makes it easy is if you connect it to an internet, you have lots of threats to deal with. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time when you're doing your initial risk assessment worrying about threat because there's plenty out there. And we'll go into why that's the reason, why that's the case. But of those two words, if you're in InfoSec, I think you need to make sure you understand those. From my position at the state, I almost always ask those definitions for those words in job interviews. Because if you don't understand what a vulnerability is and you don't understand what the threat is, it's hard to understand how to do risk management, and it's an important piece to the puzzle. And of course, then we've got the word risk, and that's just basically the possibility of experiencing a loss as a result of a threat exploiting a weakness or vulnerability. So how do we assess risk and how do we manage it? So we're going to go into the complicated way first, and then we'll go into the recommended way to start. So the complicated way is quantitative analysis. And if you're doing quantitative risk analysis, you're actually calculating everything based on money value. This is extremely beneficial in some ways because you can determine the cost-benefit analysis of security controls, whether you want to spend your money on this versus this. And the drawback to it is it can be very difficult to accomplish and it can be time-consuming. One of the biggest difficulty is calculating the cost for intangible assets. So how much does that data cost you? It's easy to tell you how much the firewall or that server or the data center from a physical perspective costs you, but how much does the data held within there cost? And that's where this one becomes a little bit more difficult, but again, it has more use when actually trying to determine costs on budgeting. So let's break the quantitative analysis down. All right, so there's several steps in the process, and we'll go through each one of these. Did the mic go out? Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't know if it probably died. Can you all hear me if I talk really loud? Okay. If it comes back on and cause you to go deaf, just put your hands over your ears or something. All right, so we're going to talk about each one of these in turn and what they mean and how they're used to do quantitative analysis. So you got asset value, your exposure factor, your single loss expectancy, your annualized rate of occurrence, your annualized loss expectancy, and then that allows you to do your cost-benefit analysis. So the first one is your asset value. For the example, which is very, very basic, just for this presentation, we're just going to say that we have System A, and then we're valuing the system from an asset level at $100,000. Pretty simple, but this would be much more complex really applying it because, again, you have to value every piece of it and to include the tangible and the intangible assets. So once you have your asset value, you can then determine your exposure factor, and this is based on the threat. So you would take each potential threat and determine an exposure factor, which is a percentage of loss. So you could say like a fire in your data center could be a threat, and what's its exposure factor is what would be the loss as a result of that threat occurring. And so you have to come up with a percentage to determine that. And this can be, again, a difficult thing to do, and it's important that you're accurate. So this is where quantitative analysis takes time because you want to make sure your numbers are accurate. So for this example, we're going to say 20%. If the threat exploits the vulnerability, its loss, the loss expectancy is 20%. So now we can do a single loss expectancy. So we're basically going to take the asset value and multiply it by the exposure factor. And in our scenario here, we've got $100,000 times 20% means we have $20,000 single loss expectancy. So in the event that threat occurred, we're expecting to lose $20,000. From there, you can figure out what your annualized rate of occurrence. And so this is a likelihood of the threat occurring in from a perspective of years. So in this example, we're going to say threat B is likely to occur once every 10 years and no more. That's what we're thinking it's going to occur. So the annualized rate of occurrence would be 0.01. If it was twice every 10 years, it would 0.02. Makes sense? Pretty simple. Again, these numbers are very basic just to understand the concepts behind how to do this type of analysis. All right, so then we can take the annualized loss expectancy. So now we're taking the single loss expectancy and the annualized loss occurrence, which was here at 0.01 and here at $20,000, and figure out what our annualized loss expectancy would be. And so the 20,000 times 0.01 means $2,000. That's your last value you have to determine before you go into how you're going to manage the risk and determine what security controls you want to put in place to mitigate that threat and how much it's going to cost. So let's look at a control, and the safeguard in this is going to be control A, it's just variable. So our safeguard has an annual cost and costs us $50 a year. So we know in 10 years, that's only $500. That's pretty cheap. Compared to the expectancy of losing $20,000 in a single loss. Without the safeguard, we knew it was $2,000 in from an annual loss expectancy. But if we apply this safeguard, it's going to protect us and basically mean instead of losing $2,000, we only lose $1,000 in the event that that threat happens and exploits the vulnerability. So the cost is $50, and we're going to save ourselves approximately $1,000 from an annual loss expectancy perspective. Now we're going to do control B. Instead of $50 a year, it's going to cost us $500 a year. So it's a lot more money per year. But the difference here is with the safeguard applied, the loss expectancy from an annualized point of view is only $250. So there's your savings. So the question is, which one's a better value for the company? And that's where cost-benefit analysis comes in. You can actually take these variables, plug them in, and determine the value to the company. And so the value to the company, it's translated here. So you take the annual loss expectancy without the safeguard, which is $2,000. We take it with the safeguard applied. So in example A, it was $1,000. Example B, it was $250. And then we also subtract the annual cost of the safeguard itself. And that's, there's a misspelling. Should be SG instead of SF, but that's okay. So then you see the value, and the value is, you're looking for a high number here. So the higher the number, the better the value it provides to the company. And so this is how you could determine. Now this is pretty close, so you could still make a determination based on budget. Maybe you don't have a lot of free cash every year to spend on it, so you decide you still want to go with option A because it only costs you $50 a year. But maybe you have the cash every year to cover that $500 and you feel it's a better investment to go ahead and go after option B. But this is, again, a time-consuming, complicated way of doing risk analysis. But it gives you accurate dollar amounts to make decisions off of. Let's look at the easier way to do it, and that's qualitative analysis. And the value here is that you instead do calculations based on not monetary values, but values such as low, medium, high. And that makes things a little easier and a lot faster to calculate. But you get limited use when you're trying to turn cost-benefit analysis and return on investment. But this is a much faster way, and this is where I recommend a lot of places start because they skip this step and they go right into finding everything that's wrong with their network, and they just start trying to tackle things, but they don't tackle it from a perspective of what's really the high risk. Just because a system has a vulnerability doesn't mean it's your highest risk that you need to spend your effort on. You got to figure out which systems have the high risk, and this is a quick and easy way to do that. And I think everyone needs to make sure they're aware of it so they can find ways to prioritize their work. Because we all have limited resources. We can't fix everything. So you're going to start simple, and you're just going to simply create a list. And so our list is going to, in this example, is define what you want to look at. I always like to start with what I call a system. And it's not a server, but a system. So a system would be defined as anything that any single asset or multiple assets that are combined to serve a specific purpose. So you may have multiple servers in your Exchange environment. Your Exchange environment is the system, but it has multiple devices within it. So you define the parameters of your system, and then you're basically, and this is kind of what the federal government does. In the federal government, they have to define it, and then they categorize it based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the three tenets of information security. The problem that you typically get when you do that is if the people that are doing the evaluation are more on the business side, they don't always evaluate it from an enterprise perspective. They look at it from the perspective of their system. Well, yeah, it's high availability. It's my system. I need it all the time. But is that high availability from the perspective of the entire enterprise? And then it's harder to define the need for integrity, especially for people that, again, are on the business side sometimes. So I simplify, and we look at it from the data, and then the importance, or in other terms, criticality. How important is the system? If it goes down, what's the impact to the company? So we're going to classify the data and look at the confidentiality, integrity of the data, and then we're going to classify the importance and see how important is it to have that system up. What's its availability requirements? And then we can just use a basic rubric here for qualitative analysis. So you've got data classification on the left and importance classification on the bottom, and it's low, medium, high on each one. And then it has a numerical value because you could graph this if you wanted to. You can make it more complex and add additional levels, or you can keep it pretty simple depending on the number of assets you're talking about. You want it, again, the whole concept here is to keep it simple. Just get yourself a reference point on where to start. So in our example, I created a list of systems that I named. Just again, it's just an example. It's important too if you have a larger enterprise where the technical point of contact and the business point of contact isn't an obvious answer. Go ahead and collect that. That's another problem I see. Organizations don't always have that readily available, and when an incident's going on, you don't want to figure out who you're supposed to call. You want to already know who you're supposed to call. So you need to identify both the technical POC and the business point of contact for every system. And then you can give an assessment to each level for each system. So maybe a public web server that's just informational based that doesn't generate revenue only has a data classification level of low because it's all public data, and the importance classification is maybe only medium. But your research and development system, because maybe this organization, that's their bread and butter, that's where they make all their money, it has a very high data classification. And it also has an importance of classification because when it goes down, R&D stops. And you got a lot of high-paying, a lot of employees you pay a whole lot of money to, and when they can't have their system up, you're paying them to do nothing. So you put that one at high. And you can go down the list and see how each one's just valued. And then the values then translate into a raw score. And the higher the number, the higher the risk. And this is just a real good advantage because from here you can then rack and stack your systems, and you know where you need to spend your time. So when you have vulnerabilities that maybe only, maybe you only have some medium and high vulnerabilities on your R&D system, but your training system has some critical vulnerabilities, which one are you going to patch first? Well, not necessarily the critical vulnerabilities. It just depends. So this gives you, make sure you're spending your time, your effort, and your resources where they need to be spent. And again, this is just raw risk. This is just get you a reference point to start. there are next steps. So the next step is you sort your list, and you start with the high risk, and then now you add your vulnerabilities, then you add your threats, and then you can calculate risk from that perspective in a more accurate level, which takes time. But again, you're focusing on that what you've already identified as high risk, and you're not doing it on a system that's low risk to start. You also have to determine your risk tolerance. And again, this is usually at the executive level in which risk tolerance is determined. But it's a step I think people in information security sometimes forget. Just because a system has a vulnerability doesn't mean the organization is wrong. In the end, the organization is meant to serve a purpose. Most likely, if it's private sector, it's trying to make money. And they have to balance everything with the bottom line if they're going to make money. So the risk tolerance, again, is up to the higher your key stakeholders. But again, if you can go to them and show them the risk assessment and say, here's where we want to spend the money. I know I don't have a whole lot. I'm not asking to put this product across everything, but I do need to put it here. You might have a better chance of getting what you need to do that. And then from there, you can select the controls you need to implement. You want to do information gathering after that and get additional information about your network. It's important to know, obviously, this is critical security control number one. You need to make sure you know your hardware, what's on your network. You got to know what software and what custom applications are running on your network. You need to track your users, specifically your admins, your privileged users. And then network interconnections. If there's two places you could spend time and controls on to get maximum value, it's on controlling administrative rights and privileged access on your network and ensuring you have proper network segmentation, because pretty much every single breach you go out there and see, they exploit existing credentials and they pivot the network almost every single time. So if you spend money in those two areas, you're better off in locking your network down. And so you gather that information up, and then you can end with the results. So you have now a prioritized list based on risk. This will help focus your efforts, and you know where to spend your limited resources. So again, this is a step that I think people shy away from, they forget to do, or they don't, or someone's not doing it in the organization, and it most absolutely needs to be done. Because not everyone, the companies just don't have the budgets to spend and to spend it on everything they possibly could to secure their network. So they need to make sure they're spending their money wisely, and it starts with risk management and risk assessment. So that's the brief. Any questions? There's no questions. Appreciate it.